Hello, community. I live in a neighborhood with several housing units of 5 floors each, a group of modest apartment towers that end right at the edge of a ravine facing a very busy highway in the city, a rather high ravine. I live in the last building next to that ravine, which with every rainfall crumbles more and more until in many places, the path behind the wall where the apartments end has completely disappeared. Even when it was less than half a meter wide, I had the chance to walk along it, holding tightly to the wall, but now it has almost completely vanished. That is good on one hand and bad on the other. It is good because thieves no longer come through there to jump into our yards and steal the things we left outside. But it is bad because we could no longer escape. In other words, the young people in the area could no longer return home late by walking along that small path. The wall had even ended up hanging in midair in some sections, representing a certain danger if the crumbling continued. But well, that is another matter. If I have been so descriptive about this place, it is because it will be important for the story. You see, at my mother's workplace, she had some people under her supervision since she was the manager of a branch of a clothing store in a shopping mall in my city. At some point, a young woman started working there, but she had a big problem getting along with the others. She was a bad co-worker, but my mother tried to integrate her until one occasion. Unfortunately, my mother found her stealing money from the register. She had to report her and fire her, but the young woman threatened her. She said that my mother would regret it, that it would be best if she withdrew her accusation. My mother did not accept. She might have done so if the girl had asked in a different manner. I know my mother well, but not if she tried to intimidate or threaten her. The young woman was fired, but she swore revenge. My mother was so upset that she vomited bile all night. When I helped her, when it seemed like she was choking in the bathroom, I noticed that her vomit was a very intense green color, as if she had drunk paint. That vomiting began to repeat every night at a certain hour. When my mother locked herself in the bathroom, we would hear her crying in pain. At that time, even without believing in witchcraft or that sort of thing that many of you are probably already imagining, we knew that what that girl had said had something to do with it, that those ill intentions could be affecting my mother, or perhaps it was even the feeling of guilt for having fired that young woman. My mother became so ill that she requested the vacation time she had pending in order to recover. Her boss told her to rest for an additional week and said that the store would pay for it, so that she would not have to worry, so that she could fully recover. But that was when, instead of improving, my mother got worse. My mother began seeing things. She told us that there was a man who appeared in her bedroom at night, a fleshless man who danced in her room. She described how he did it with his arms raised upward, moving from one side to the other. My sister and I would ask if we could sleep with her, but she said no, that she did not want what she was suffering to affect us, that she did not want it to be contagious. It became such an anguishing feeling for us that we began going out at night. It was horrible. It drained us, made us feel weak, but only at night, because during the day, the house was almost like a normal house. At night it was different. We felt that there was something in the house, something evil, something terrible. One day my sister would go out and I would stay behind to take care of my mother, and on the next day I would go out and my sister would stay. That was our way of surviving it. On one of those nights I went to a friend's house. His mother worked at night, so I would go play video games with him until very late, into the early morning hours. Suddenly I received a call from my sister. She told me that one of my uncles had arrived with a priest at our house to see my mother, that they had asked about me, and that she told them I was asleep. She wanted to wake me in the 4th hour. She told me they were in my mother's room, that my uncle was about to go out for something at the pharmacy, and that he would return as soon as possible. But so that he would not catch me by surprise in the parking area of the entrance, she told me to come in from the back, through the ravine. I told her I could not because there was no space left to walk there, but she hung up. I told my friend what my sister had just said, and he told me that if I tried, yes, it was possible, only with a lot of caution, but it was indeed possible. He said that he had gone through the back before, that he would go with me. We were not far, only a few blocks from my housing unit, So we ran for a few minutes until we reached that ravine. We walked alongside the wall, but after just a few meters it became impossible. We had to continue walking sideways, pressing ourselves against the wall, trying to hold on to it, afraid that the ground would collapse beneath our feet. We advanced like that until we were only about 40 meters short of reaching my building's location, but there it was no longer possible to advance. The path ended. A hole had formed, a couple of meters deep in the ravine, and for some reason related to engineering or who knows what, that wall had not collapsed. There were 2 meters of wall hanging in midair, but just above that part, there was about half a meter of chain link fence. Some neighbors had organized at some point to put up those fences back when there were more thefts. It did not prevent a thief from jumping over, but it made it much harder to escape with the loot. At that moment, I tried to climb the wall and move forward, crouching beneath the chain link fence. It was the only option. There was no other way. "Come on, just like Mario Brothers," my friend said. I began to laugh a little while he helped me climb up and hang from there. He would accompany me up to that point. He was waiting for me to cross without falling so he could leave. But just when I was getting to the other side of the gap, he shouted at me. He shouted at me not to continue. He told me that there was something on the other side. When I looked to where he was pointing, I saw something right in front of my building's location. A figure dressed in black. It seemed like a woman dancing. Dancing exactly like the fleshless man that my mother said appeared in her room had danced. I was about to fall, about to let go. I told my friend that I could not go back, that I was going to fall, that I had to keep moving forward. Then he picked up a stone or a bottle that was lying there. I do not remember exactly, but I do remember that he threw it with a lot of force at that dancing figure, and he hit her. He hit her, and that thing turned toward us, and then, instead of running away, headed for the wall and lunged toward the ravine. But it did not fall. It descended that almost vertical ravine as if it were a spider. Out of fear, my friend ran in the opposite direction. As best I could, I jumped into the housing unit, even though I had not yet reached my building and had to run toward the parking area. Even if I ran into my uncle, I did not care. I entered my house running, but my uncle was still in my mother's room, along with his priest friend and another woman who, my sister told me, had arrived a little later. They stayed until dawn. Nobody realized that I had not been there, so I could not say what I had seen. Otherwise, they would scold me, or they would have known I was not in my house that night. The priest was the first to leave, but my uncle and the woman stayed until the afternoon to take care of my mother. I heard them talking. I heard how the woman said that someone had sent my mother a dead spirit, but that she could not remove it, that it was something more complicated than what she usually dealt with. Someone arrived to bring her a bag with something that looked like salt, and she scattered it around doors and windows, around every entrance to the house. At one point, when she was not looking, I took some of it and went out to throw it at the rear wall, where I had seen that woman, or whatever it was, dancing. It took my mother months, but over time she recovered completely. Eventually, we ended up leaving that apartment and moved to a place nearby, but away from that ravine. It will always cause me a great deal of curiosity to know what it was that I saw, but I know that here in this community, I might be able to find answers. I send you all greetings and thank you for listening. Hello, the dark side. It is a pleasure to greet you and tell you that we listen to your stories while we are working. However, when one of us is left alone, we stop listening because, even though nothing has ever happened to us here, you know how suggestion can be dangerous. Today I want to tell you my story. It is not recent, but whenever I tell it to someone, they suggest I share it here. I would prefer that you not mention my name, but if you want, you can speak openly about the places where it happened. I will attach photos of where it occurred in case you decide to use them. This happened 26 years ago. I was 14 at the time, and I am currently 40. It is worth mentioning that this was during the period when I was behaving the worst at home. My mother worked all day and left me with my grandmother. I would slip out without her noticing and wander around the neighborhoods, which, although close to my house, were not so close that I should have been going there alone, especially not at night on my bike. Of course, times were different, but even so, I knew I was not supposed to sneak out. I live in a municipality very close to the capital of San Luis Potosí, called Soledad de Graciano Sanchez. In that municipality, there is a neighborhood called Los Fresnos. In that neighborhood, there was an abandoned high school that is now used as an archive of the Autonomous University of San Luis Potosí, but before that, it was known as Prepa Uno. When what I am about to tell you happened, it was still a high school, but there were no longer any classes being held there. We knew that someone was supposed to be watching over it, but we never saw them. We also never learned any real stories about the place. Of course, people said it was haunted, but we had never verified that, at least not until that day. The high school was on a very long, straight street. Before, where that street ended, there was only dirt, and there was no way through. Later, a subdivision and a condominium were built, and a passage opened up. But at that time, people could go out there without any problem because the street was closed off. Everyone used the sidewalk by the high school to teach their children to ride bikes, to roller skate, or simply to sit outside and enjoy the fresh air. The area had several planters with very large trees, so it was always full of people. I used to hang out with several boys from the block. We would play soccer, taking advantage of the fact that no cars passed by, or we would just sit there talking, maybe smoking a cigarette, which was the most forbidden thing we ever did. On the particular day I'm going to talk about, it was strange from the start. I arrived at the planters, and there was nobody there. None of my friends, nor the other people who usually came out to that spot. It was almost 6 in the evening. I remember it was autumn because it started getting dark around 6:30 or 6:45. It seemed very odd to me that nobody had shown up. The atmosphere felt heavy and strange. In several stories you have narrated, I have heard about such moments where everything feels off right before something bad happens. I was sitting on the largest planter on the street in front of the high school, but not right against the wall, on the side facing the street, waiting for one of my friends to arrive. Finally, at least one friend showed up. We were talking about how weird it was that nobody else was there and about other trivial things. Then we heard someone make a psst sound at us twice. The sound came from our right side. We thought maybe it was the others arriving, so I stood up to look because one of the planters of the high school blocked our view. But there was nobody there. It was such a very straight street that if someone had been coming, we would have seen them, but there was no one. We went back to talking and tried to ignore that. About 10 or 15 minutes later, we heard it again. 2 psst sounds, just the same as before. But this time, it came from the left side, where there was a large pile of dirt blocking the street. Even though we were far from the end of the street, it sounded way too close. Of course, we found it very strange that we could not see anyone on that side either. No one who could have been calling out to us. Still, we did not rule out the possibility that it was our friends trying to play a trick on us. After another 10 or 15 minutes, we heard it again. Now the sound came from the street in front of us, where the block was smaller. On the corner there was a store, and sometimes we hung out there too. We thought maybe it really was our friends. By this time it was completely dark. We still found ourselves alone in that place, and we were really puzzled. But we kept trusting that it was just them messing with us, like always. So we continued talking, until once again we heard that sound. This time it came from very, very close, so close that we heard it right above us. Once again, it was 2 quick psst sounds, just 2. In that moment, we were petrified. It took us a couple of seconds to gather the courage to look up, to turn and see who, or what, it was. In the branches of the tree behind us, there was a person crouched like a lizard. It was a woman. She wore white clothing and had tangled hair, but her eyes were fixed directly on us. She was positioned as if she was about to pounce right onto us. We let out a terrible scream and ran. I do not know which direction my friend ran off in, but he took off running. I grabbed my bicycle and pedaled as fast as I could, never looking back. I was going so fast that I passed through a street where the city bus turns, and the bus had to hit the brakes so it would not run me over. I was crying and trembling. My legs were shaking. I felt a strange heat, like the kind you feel when you are truly scared, burning in your ears and my heart pounding 1,000 beats per minute. When I got home, my mother had already arrived. I told her what had happened because I could not stop crying. I never went back to that place. I did not know what happened to my friends because back then we did not have cell phones, and I never thought to ask for their phone numbers. I knew where they lived, but that part of the neighborhood was off limits to me. I never found out what that was. Maybe it was a homeless person or who knows what. People said many things about that place. The little sister of a friend had supposedly seen a woman who looked like the one we saw, and according to her, this woman had tried to throw herself off a nearby bridge several nights. Other people said that La Llorona appeared there, because behind the high school runs the Rio Santiago Boulevard, which indeed used to be a river. In any case, these were just stories we told each other when we were out there talking, but we never could verify any of them, until that day. To this day, I cannot pass by that place. I have gone by it 2 or 3 times only because I had no choice, but I always close my eyes or turn the other way. Even though so many years have passed, I remember it as vividly as if it happened yesterday. It is also very important for me to tell you that back then I behaved really, really badly, and after that incident, I never went out again. I put my bicycle away for a while and stayed home, doing what my grandmother told me to do. My behavior changed drastically from that moment on. I do not know if what I saw was a witch. My mother thinks so as well. In the stories you have shared, I have heard that witches make that psst sound when they want to lure you. So maybe it was something I attracted with my bad behavior, do you not think? But this is my story, and I thank you for your attention. Good evening, community. What I am about to tell you happened to me when I was very young, just a child, long before listened to any content of this kind. So, honestly, I doubt that these sorts of witch-related events happen exclusively because of listening to these kinds of stories. Rather, I believe it is something that has always existed among us. My name is Elena. I live in the southern part of Mexico City, and I am currently 22 years old. In fact, I was never baptized. I do not know if that has anything to do with what happened. The story I am about to share took place in the eastern part of the city, near the Constitucion de 1917 subway station. Yes, I know, it is a rather well-known area for the witches said to reside around Cerro de la Estrella. I was extremely attached to my older sister. She cared for me from a very young age, and was the first person I ever called Mom, since my parents worked all day, every day, and she looked after me. She did not like the idea of me spending almost the entire week at daycare. Years later, my sister met a man. They moved in together near the Santa Cruz Sports Complex. When I was 8 years old, my niece Sophia was born. Let me repeat, I was very attached to my sister. So, in order to prevent me from missing her too much, my parents and her in-laws agreed that I would spend the weekends with her and her husband's family, which consisted of his parents-in-law and his 3 brothers. They all cared for me greatly. Everything was wonderful at that time. Every Friday after class, my dad would take me to my sister's house. Within my family, I was practically the perfect child. Everyone praised my parents and my sister for my good values, my good grades, for me not being rude, and for having excellent manners. As I mentioned, my brother-in-law's family loved me very much. Also, my niece and I were the only girls among so many male cousins, so of course they spoiled us. They even invited me to spend vacations with them. They took me to family parties, out to eat, to amusement parks, and so forth. They wanted to keep me close because I would be a good influence on Sophia. I remember clearly that this happened during summer vacation. My niece was just approaching her first birthday, and my sister often spent a lot of time alone since my brother-in-law's work schedule had changed. He now worked the night shift. My little niece had been sleeping very poorly the last few days, having nightmares, waking up at night, sometimes even laughing by herself as she slept and doing strange things like that, as if someone were talking to her at night. Everything began one night when my sister was sleeping alone in her bed with my niece in the crib beside her. We both clearly heard what sounded like long fingernails tapping on the window at the head of the bed. That window looked directly out onto the street. When she heard the tapping, by instinct, she thought it was my brother-in-law. However, upon sitting at the edge of the bed and fully waking up, she saw that it was barely 4 in the morning. My brother-in-law did not get off work until 7. My niece started crying terribly again, as if something was hurting her badly, and my sister felt very afraid. So she picked her up from the crib, wrapped her tightly in blankets, let the dog into the room, and both of them slept together in the bed. But this kept escalating. One time, at around 7 or 8 in the evening, it was not very late. In fact, there were still people outside on the sidewalk selling food. My sister was serving customers at the small grocery store she and my brother-in-law owned. This store was literally attached to their house. There was a very short hallway connecting the store to the living room, and you had to cross the living room to reach the bedroom where both of them slept and where my niece's crib was. There were a lot of customers in the store that evening, so my sister decided to leave Sophia asleep in the bedroom. She covered her with blankets and placed large cushions around her so that if the baby rolled over, she would not fall off the bed. You know how moms are. There came a moment when their dog ran, growling furiously toward the living room. A loud thud against the wall was clearly heard, followed by my niece screaming, "Ma!" and then beginning to cry horribly. My sister, of course, forgot all about the customers and ran straight to the bedroom. She found my niece on the floor, with half of her body underneath the bed. The first thing my sister checked was whether the baby had hit her head. Even though she did not see anything, she immediately took her to the emergency room. The diagnosis showed that she had not even suffered a blow. Meanwhile, I stayed at the house with her mother-in-law and 2 of her brothers-in-law. Out of curiosity, I went to check the bed. There was absolutely no sign that the baby had rolled off or fallen. There was no possible way. There were no marks on the bed that anyone or anything else had leaned on the blankets or cushions. Nothing. Also, the dog would not stop sniffing around, as if it were trying to find something. When my sister returned from the hospital, I told her all of this, that nothing was out of place on the bed or disturbed, and that it was very strange. We inspected everything again carefully, and indeed there was nothing. It was as if something had picked up the baby and placed her on the floor. The next day, her mother-in-law told her that there were many witches in that part of the city, and gave her some advice on how to protect the baby. But my sister, with her terrible memory, forgot how to do it. Well, here comes my part in this story. When I stayed overnight during vacation, in order not to feel alone, I slept in my sister's bedroom, so my brother-in-law slept upstairs at his parents' place with his brothers. Downstairs, it was just the 3 of us, my sister, my baby niece, and me. One night, after watching a children's movie, we went to sleep as usual. But this situation occurred in the early morning, almost at 3 o'clock. I woke up with a lot of pain in my body, but I did not wake up in a normal way like anyone else. I just opened my eyes as if I had never really fallen asleep. I would not know exactly how to explain it, but I am sure someone out there has felt this way, as if you only lay down to rest and then immediately opened your eyes. I swear I felt extremely strange upon waking. I also remember that I did not even wake up lying down, but rather with my back leaning against the wall, almost sitting up. I woke up with the feeling that something was watching me. When I tried to speak to wake my sister, who was next to me, my mouth hurt terribly. I even felt a sharp pain in my lower lip, and my entire mouth felt sore and hot. When I touched it, I felt something wet. I became even more scared and shook my sister. She woke up very annoyed, got up to turn on the light, and I only saw terror on her face. She immediately ran upstairs to her mother-in-law's home without saying anything to me. I just stayed there paralyzed. I looked down at my chest and saw that my pajamas were covered in blood. I touched my mouth and found it was also bleeding. I wanted to cry so badly, but I did not do it because I did not want to wake the baby. Suddenly, I saw my brother-in-law and his entire family running downstairs. He picked me up and carried me into the living room. Together, my brother-in-law, my sister, his parents, and her 3 brothers-in-law examined me, the house, the room, the bed, and the baby. There was no sign that I had hit the nightstand next to the bed. There was not even a drop of blood on the blankets, the pillow, or the bedroom rug. Nothing. Only I was covered in blood. Later, I noticed bruises on my arms and legs. Honestly, it looked like something had beaten me badly. I felt disoriented and I even shook uncontrollably. When I was finally able to do so, I cried. I was just a child, and these were feelings I had never experienced before. I was in shock. They treated my lip, gave me tea, applied ointments to the bruises, helped me change out of my pajamas, and they even cleansed me with an egg, a common spiritual remedy. They all tried to calm me down until I finally fell asleep again. The next day, very early, my sister's mother-in-law sent her sons out to get holy water to sprinkle around the house. Then they took me back to my parents. My sister and her in-laws did not stop apologizing because they felt they had not taken proper care of me. But nobody really knew what had happened. Years later, my mother told me that in private my sister's mother-in-law had told her that a witch had probably bitten me. The truth is, I was just a child and never examined my own lip. I was too scared to do it and it hurt. However, when they examined me to clean the blood, they realized that what I had was not an impact wound, but rather a bite. They did not tell me this at the time because it would have frightened me even more. I was only 8 years old. As it was, the experience had already been traumatic, and knowing that could have distressed me even more. My sister's mother-in-law promised to do a thorough spiritual cleansing of the house so that I would continue visiting them. They cared about me a lot, and they liked having me spend weekends and vacations with them. It took me about 3 more months before I returned. My mother confessed that it took them a long time to finish cleaning the house completely. But when I finally did go back, my sister told me that my niece never again had any issues with her sleep after what happened to me. After that night, I began to have some sort of gift. I could dream of people close to me who had already passed away, dreams that felt very real. I could see shadows, hear sobs, and so forth, all without feeling any fear whatsoever. For example, a friend of mine, who unfortunately took his own life when I was 16, appeared in my dream. I spoke with him, and he even gave me some messages to pass on to other members of our circle of friends. Yes, I was accurate about everything. He told me things that even happened before I met them. It has been 15 years since that night, and my family, as well as my sister's family, still remember it. We also still wonder who or what did that. My sister's mother-in-law says that witches and such beings only target pure souls without malice, those who are innocent. To this day, she says that I remain such a soul, that whatever was bothering my niece found something to take from me, and after that it left her alone. But the reality is that all I know is that something bit my lip. Thank you for listening to my story. Have a good evening, everyone.